And thank you, Mr. Limbrick. I actually feel like I understand a few things better as a result. Can't say that I necessarily agree with Mr. Limbrick in his assessment, but I certainly listened with interest to that contribution. And he's absolutely right. I mean, this, and as Ms. Watt says, it's not very common that we come in here to debate a constitutional amendment, to debate changing our constitution. And certainly entrenchment into statutory law like this, where we will need a full majority to do this, but it doesn't mean that it can't be taken away, as we know. But this bill is about entrenching the fracking bans into the Constitution. And so, as I said, this does need, as we know that this amends Section 18.2, it does need a special majority. Entrenchment is mentioned and dealt with in Section 6 of the Australia Act, which Mr. Limbrick mentioned, and it posits that the Constitution, powers or procedures of the Parliament of this state entrenchment is dealt with in Section 6 of the Australia Act, which posits that the Constitution, powers or procedures of the Parliament of the state in this context, the Constitution means how the Parliament is constituted, e.g. how many houses it has. Now, Mr. Limbrick mentioned Professor Anne Twomey, and while she believes, quite rightly, that introducing fracking into the Constitution will be legally valid, its entrenchment wouldn't be, and I think that's where Mr. Limbrick's debate here is. It could be removed very easily by a simple majority. But it's unlikely that it will be. It's very unlikely because everyone is in furious agreement about the permanent prohibition on fracking in this country. I could be concerned, and certainly when thinking about this, it did give rise to whether this was setting a dangerous precedent. And that whether we would see things like mandatory sentencing entrenched into our Constitution. But when I actually, and I think it was Professor Twomey who actually helped me on this, that I didn't believe that I need, well, not that I didn't need to be concerned about this, but that bad laws could be removed relatively easily. And this was actually quite a revelation to me. I had no idea that the Constitution was actually that malleable, and because it's been so rare that we have seen changes to the Constitution, that actually you can introduce things into the Constitution and you can take them away. I mean, I'm sure Mr. Limbrick and I are on the same line, that if there was something around decriminalising all drugs into the Constitution, he and I would be in possibly we would agree with the idea of decriminalising all drugs, but certainly he wouldn't like to see it in the Constitution, and it never would have occurred to me to put it in there until today. So it's really opened up a whole lot of ideas. But look, I suspect now is not the time, and I think I take up Mr. Limbrick's with the notion that we would be governed from the grave because of these entrenchment into our Constitution. As Professor Twomey says, it's actually very easy to remove these entrenchments in our Constitution, which does then pose the question, why are we doing it? However, I accept, and I have been saying this, and I think I was saying it an awful lot yesterday, I'm not the opposition, and I respect that the government actually went to the 2018 election with the policy that they would in some way entrench the prohibition of fracking in this state. So I'm not going to oppose this. I mean, I think it's interesting that the only other example in the Victorian Constitution that we have on this is water services. And I understand that the Liberals and the Nationals are also not opposing this bill. In fact, I understand that the Nats and the Greens may even be taking credit for this.
Now it's getting very hard to figure out
who's on first. But when we look at something like the water services, which is the only other time that we've seen an entrenchment into our constitution, that has never been removed. No successive governments have found a need to do it. No independents have found that entrenchment in our constitution was so appalling that it needed to be removed. But I think what I'm quite comfortable in is in the fact that almost all of us probably are in furious agreement that there should be a ban on fracking in Victoria. And this may be an example of a policy that is worthy enough to test those constitutional limits of our parliament. Now, I will be interested to see the commentary on this, because I suspect this vote will get the majority that it needs to pass and to change the constitution. So I will read with interest the academics' view on this. But I think what we do know is that we have the ability to do it, which is something that is something I was not aware of. But we also equally have the ability to remove it. And so therefore, entrenchment seems to be a fairly strong word for what we're doing here, because future governments actually could take it away. But I don't oppose this bill.